I'm 75 now and I can't remember anybody except the Queen Bee. The room had been prepared for a routine royal briefing, but the document resting beneath King Charles's hand contained something far more devastating. When he finally spoke, Camilla did not interrupt, protest, or even reach for the papers placed before her. She simply stared at him. In one sudden decree, the king had defined her future, limited her power, and established exactly what would happen to her place within the monarchy when his reign came to an end. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla entered Clarence's house expecting a discussion about engagements. Instead, she found Charles alone, beside a sealed document, a fountain pen, and an empty chair. No secretaries waited nearby, no advisors stood ready. The silence made everything clear. This was not a proposal, it was a decision. Charles told her that upon his death or abdication, she would not become Queen Dowager. That title refers to a king's widow who keeps royal standing after his reign ends. She would withdraw from official duties, surrender control of her publicly funded household, leave Clarence's house within 90 days, and hold no ceremonial authority during William's reign. Her personal title might remain, but its power would be gone. Camilla gripped the arm of her chair. She had expected a smaller role under the future king, not removal from the system she had served for years. The decree felt less like retirement and more like separation. When she asked whether the decision came from Charles or palace pressure, he slowly set down the pen. Charles did not soften his answer. He said the signature was his because the responsibility was his. That calm admission wounded her more than anger could have. It showed he had prepared for this moment long before summoning her. Camilla then learned the decree had already been witnessed, sealed and placed with the Royal Legal Office, the department responsible for protecting binding decisions made by the sovereign. Her agreement had never been required. She had been called only so her husband could tell her before officials acted. Then Catherine's name appeared. The document directed that Camilla's patronages, ceremonial responsibilities and household archives be reviewed for transfer to the Princess of Wales. Suddenly she saw not only an ending, but another woman being prepared to inherit the public space she had fought to secure. As Charles closed the folder, she noticed a second document beneath it bearing William's name. But before Camilla could confront the forces behind the decree, she had to face the painful truth about the three people whose futures had now become inseparably linked. For Charles, the decree was an act of duty. For William, it was protection for the reign he would one day inherit. For Camilla, it was something far more personal, a judgment on whether she had ever truly belonged. Behind the formal clauses were three human beings carrying old wounds, private loyalties, and sharply different ideas about the monarchy's future. The document had settled the legal question, but emotionally it had opened every conflict the family had spent years trying to contain. Charles remained alone after the meeting, rereading the first page until the words seemed heavier than the paper. He pressed his thumb against his wedding ring, caught between the woman he had defended for years and the crown he could not reshape around personal loyalty. The crown meant the institution of the monarchy itself, larger than any marriage or individual reign. He knew affection could not permanently bind the son who would inherit everything after him. William saw the coming reign differently. He wanted a smaller, disciplined monarchy centred on Catherine, their children, and one clear chain of authority. The future king feared rival households, competing loyalties, and old wounds following him onto the throne. For him, the decree was not punishment. It was protection against confusion at the moment when stability would matter most. Camilla sat alone in her room and removed her reading glasses. She placed them beside the untouched document, remembering how long it had taken to move from rejection to acceptance. Every ceremony, title, and sacrifice now felt temporary. Her deepest fear was not losing duties. It was being reduced to an uncomfortable chapter, closed the moment Charles was gone. Camilla barely spoke at dinner. When the king said the order would protect her from conflict under William, she answered that protection chosen without her consent felt remarkably like exclusion. He lowered his eyes. She turned away. Their restraint made the distance between them more painful than any argument. Then the second document changed everything. William had supported a clear transition, but he had not demanded her removal from Clarence House. That clause came directly from Charles. Catherine had also reviewed the patronage transfers and insisted in a documented briefing that Camilla's charitable work must not be publicly discredited. The Princess of Wales was preparing to inherit responsibility, yet she refused to turn another woman's departure into humiliation. Charles had not acted because of theory or distant planning. His decision began after one specific royal ceremony when a private confrontation exposed how dangerous overlapping authority could become. To understand why Charles acted so suddenly, the story must return to the night when a single confrontation turned quiet concern into an irreversible decision. The decree had not begun with lawyers, advisors, or constitutional planning. It had begun 6 weeks earlier at a private Windsor reception. Moments after the final guests had left the state's apartments, a disagreement over one ceremonial instruction became a confrontation no one in the family could dismiss. By midnight, Charles had watched Camilla and William stand on opposite sides of the same room, each speaking as though the future crown belonged to them. That was the moment the king realised a choice could no longer be postponed. Camilla had instructed the Lord Chamberlain's office to reserve a permanent senior place for her at future coronation commemorations, even after William became king. The Lord Chamberlain's office is the department that organises royal ceremonies and the sovereign's programme. The request was meant to protect continuity, but it reached the prince before approval, and he ordered it withdrawn. William entered the smaller drawing room after the reception and placed the amended seating plan on the table. He told Charles and the Queen Consort that no one could predetermine ceremonial authority within his future reign. She answered that she was protecting stability, not challenging him. He replied that continuity could not become permanent influence. Camilla's expression hardened. She understood that the future king did not see her as a guide, but as a rival centre of loyalty. Charles asked them both to lower their voices, yet neither stepped back. She demanded assurance that she would not be discarded. William asked whether his father expected him to inherit the crown without the freedom to shape his own household. Charles watched years of pain enter every sentence. After Camilla left, the Lord Chamberlain remained behind and delivered a private warning during a documented palace briefing. Staff were already receiving conflicting expectations about the next reign. Unless her future position was formally defined, two chains of authority could emerge at the very moment the monarchy needed one clear voice. Charles found her alone later that night, still wearing the jewellery from the reception. Camilla told him she would never allow William to treat her as an embarrassment. The king heard more than anger. He heard fear turning into resolve. An informal promise would no longer be enough. Only a binding decree could stop a family battle from becoming a constitutional spectacle. Charles began drafting the order the next morning. Yet the harshest clause, the command that she leave Clarence House within 90 days, appeared only after another discovery suggested she might be preparing an independent royal court. When Camilla finally learned what Charles believed he had discovered, the restrained grief of the first meeting gave way to the confrontation neither of them could avoid. Camilla returned to Charles's study before sunset, carrying the decree in both hands. This time she did not sit. She placed the document on his desk, pushed it toward him, and asked one question. "When did you decide that my life after you no longer belonged to me?" What followed was not a constitutional discussion between a sovereign and his consort. It was a wounded confrontation between two people who had survived decades together, only to discover that love could not protect them from succession. Camilla demanded an explanation for the Clarence House clause. The residence was not simply an official home, it was where she and Charles had built their married life away from ceremonies and public judgment. A clause is a specific part of a legal document, and this one ordered her to leave within 90 days of his death or abdication. To her, it felt like an eviction written before she had even become a widow. Charles opened a separate file. Inside were proposed household arrangements prepared by one of her senior aides. The plan suggested keeping a private advisory office, communications staff, ceremonial consultants and patronage coordinators after William became king. The monarch said the structure looked like an independent court, a separate centre of influence operating beside the future sovereign's household. Camilla's voice rose. She insisted the plan had been created to protect her charities and prevent loyal employees from being dismissed overnight. When the king called it a competing court, she stared at him in disbelief. After years of standing beside him, he now seemed to see ambition where she saw survival. Charles finally admitted his deepest fear. William would inherit the crown, carrying old pain over Diana, public suspicion surrounding the Queen Consort, and concern about Catherine's authority. He could not leave his son a monarchy divided by unresolved resentment. One unclear instruction could become a national crisis during the most fragile moment of transition. Camilla studied the file and suddenly noticed language she had never approved. One paragraph proposed that official royal channels continue promoting her activities after the next reign began. A senior aide had expanded a basic retirement arrangement into something far more powerful. Charles accepted that she had not authorised every detail, but he still refused to withdraw the decree. The document's existence proved how easily uncertainty could be used by courtiers or factions after him. Camilla then asked whether William truly had the power to enforce it. Charles answered that the prince would not act alone. A small transition group had already been chosen, and one woman within it held far more influence than she expected. The decree may have carried Charles's signature, but its true strength came from the carefully chosen figures standing behind it, and from the woman determined to prevent the transition from becoming an act of revenge. Royal power is rarely exercised by the loudest person in the room. It moves through signatures, trusted conversations, private assurances, and decisions made before the public understands that anything has changed. Behind Charles's decree stood a small transition group, but its most important influence did not come from a lawyer or senior courtier. It came from Catherine, who recognised that the order could either secure William's reign with dignity or turn Camilla's departure into a humiliation that would poison the family for another generation. Charles appointed William, Catherine, Princess Anne, the Keeper of the Privy Purse, and the Lord Chamberlain to oversee the transition. The Keeper of the Privy Purse is the official responsible for royal finances, while the Lord Chamberlain manages major household and ceremonial matters. Together, they would reorganise residences, staff, patronages, archives, and public duties without allowing private resentment to fracture the monarchy. William would hold ultimate control once he became king. The prince would direct the sovereign's household, official calendar, occupied residences, and working roles. The decree did not grant him that authority. It removed uncertainty so that his reign would not begin with a public battle against Camilla. William's anger, however, remained deeply personal. During a private recorded briefing, he admitted that the Windsor confrontation had reopened memories he believed he had mastered. He could not allow his father's wife to shape Catherine's place. After the succession, Anne warned him that pain could easily disguise itself as duty. If he acted from resentment, even a necessary decision would look like revenge. Catherine quietly changed the direction of the meeting. She placed the list of transferred patronages on the table and crossed out the proposal for an immediate announcement. The Princess of Wales insisted that Camilla must finish selected commitments and personally contact the charities that had trusted her for years. Her compassion did not weaken William's authority. It protected it from cruelty and added one condition of her own. Every decision had to carry a written reason. The Princess Royal refused to let courtiers use the decree to settle private scores, and she reminded William that strength would be judged by how the family treated someone whose influence was ending. Catherine then proposed an independent foundation to protect Camilla's work in literacy, domestic abuse, and animal welfare. Charles approved it immediately, though he feared his wife might see respect as consolation. Before Camilla could accept any of it, the first notice reached Clarence House. Her senior staff were told that future contracts were already under review. The decree had been designed for the end of a reign, but as the first letters reached Clarence House, Camilla discovered that its consequences had already begun. The first sign of change was not a public announcement or a grand ceremonial gesture. It was an envelope placed beside Camilla's breakfast tray. Inside was a staffing notice confirming that several senior contracts would no longer renew automatically and that responsibility for future patronage planning would move to the transition office. Camilla read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully, looked across the silent room, and realised that the palace had begun preparing for a future in which it no longer needed her. Camilla watched the transition move through Clarence House one file at a time. Staff members were told that their employment would be reviewed individually. Ceremonial records were copied for William's future household and patronage files were prepared for Catherine. The transition office was the small palace team responsible for moving duties, staff and records from one reign to the next. Its work looked administrative, but every folder, leaving a cabinet, made the decree feel more real. The Queen Consort kept several long-planned engagements, yet new invitations extending beyond Charles's reign were quietly redirected. No public statement explained the change. That silence mattered because it allowed the palace to reshape her future before the public even knew a decision had been made. Camilla's longest-serving secretary entered carrying a list of jobs under review and apologised when emotion broke through her voice. She feared losing the position around which she had built years of service. Camilla comforted her, promising that no loyal employee would be abandoned without support. Yet once the aide left and the door closed, she gripped the desk until her hands trembled. Charles arrived without warning. The king offered to pause the staffing changes until she had spoken personally with every department, but she refused. Camilla said a delay would only encourage people to pretend the outcome might change. Her answer carried pain, but also resolve. If she was being forced to leave power behind, she would decide how she faced it. Then the archive review uncovered something dangerous. The original Windsor household proposal, the document Charles believed proved plans for an independent court, was missing. Only a copy remained. Before questioning could begin, Camilla's deputy private secretary resigned through a signed letter, admitting to overextending preparatory instructions but refusing to say whether another palace figure had encouraged the plan. Camilla could have used the discovery to reopen the decree. Instead, she requested a private meeting with William. No lawyers, no courtiers, and no Charles. With the palace already shifting around them, Camilla and William finally entered a room alone and faced the history neither had ever fully spoken aloud. There were no private secretaries waiting outside the door, no legal documents open on the table, and no king present to control the conversation. Camilla and William sat opposite one another in a small room at Windsor, carrying decades of history into a meeting scheduled for 30 minutes. It lasted nearly 2 hours. For the first time, she spoke openly about her fear of disappearing. And he spoke openly about the childhood pain that made the idea of her future influence impossible for him to ignore. Camilla began without demanding anything. She told William she had not come to overturn Charles's decree or force herself into his future reign. She wanted one honest answer. Did he truly believe she had served the monarchy for years, only to secure permanent power for herself? William chose his words carefully. His concern was not one residence, charity or ceremonial seat. It was the danger of unresolved loyalties dividing the palace when Charles died. A royal household is the official team that supports the monarch's duties, schedule and public work. The prince needed Catherine's authority to be unmistakable and he refused to begin his reign negotiating arrangements inherited from his father. Camilla finally named the fear beneath her anger. Losing official duties frightened her less than being rewritten as someone who had never mattered. She asked whether William intended to remove her from portraits, anniversaries, and the record of Charles's reign. Her voice weakened because she was no longer asking for influence. She was asking to be remembered. William offered honesty, not affection. He could not erase the past or promise a closeness they had never shared, but he would not erase her service. The Queen Consort would remain in official archives, portraits and historical accounts. Her place in Charles's reign would be preserved, even though her authority would not continue into his. Camilla accepted the decree. She agreed to leave formal duty, dissolve her household and vacate Clarence House when required. In return, she asked for time to conclude her patronages personally and protection for her loyal staff. William agreed immediately. William also softened the harshest consequence. The 90-day deadline would remain, but she would receive a private crown residence for life. A crown residence is a home controlled by the sovereign and assigned for royal use. He also supported Catherine's charitable foundation plan, allowing Camilla's causes to continue without creating a rival court. Camilla removed a small set of household keys and placed them on the table. She would not wait for officials to take power from her room by room. She would begin the transfer herself.